Welcome to the Teaching Football Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Debates. Thank you for watching and sharing with your family and friends. And remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of this video. In this episode, we're going to get ready for the new football season. We're going to talk about the positions of the officials and the penalties, common terms, and cliches and phrases that you'll hear during the upcoming season. For you existing football fans, this is a way to review and start thinking about the upcoming season and start getting ready for the season. For you new football fans, this is a way to enhance your knowledge, learn a little bit about the most common penalties, learn to recognize some terms that you're going to hear announcers say before, during, or after the course of a game. And that way you'll hopefully know what they're talking about and can seem more fluent in the football language. And we're also going to look at some common cliches that announcers say or coaches say in interviews before, now what I don't like, during games and after games. But before we begin with all that, let's look at the positions of the officials for these games. Since we're going to be talking about penalties, it's a good time to update ourselves with the names of each of the different officials and briefly talk about their roles. For starters, we're going to look at the referee down in the blue triangle on the lower right side. Their job is to watch the offensive line on the right side, the corresponding defensive players, and focus on the quarterback. They're doing this for both run and pass plays and looking for holding from the offense, penalties from the defense, and to protect the quarterback. To the referee's left is the umpire, doing a similar job watching the left side of the offensive line and looking for any offensive or defensive penalties as they also watch the corresponding defensive players on that side of the line. We also have on each end of the line the down judge and the line judge. The down judge is in the red triangle on the left side. They're making sure that players don't cross the line of scrimmage, that imaginary line, the length of the ball. And they're also watching the areas near them for pass receivers and watching the ends of the offensive and defensive lines. In the back, you have the side judge in the top left, the back judge in the middle, and the field judge in the top right. They're responsible for watching the receivers and the defensive backs, looking for any penalties that way. The back judge has a couple of different jobs. We'll talk a little bit more about a couple of them later. But one of their main jobs on run plays is to watch the defense for any defensive penalties, especially the defensive line. They have a better view than the referee or the umpire, even though they're 25, 30 yards away from the line of scrimmage. Sometimes that back judge can see things that the referee and the umpire can't. So that's just a quick review of the officials that we have for NFL and college games. College, they have a little bit different official lineup. We're not going to get into that right now. We're just mostly going to focus on the NFL. But we are going to talk about some of these penalties that are common both in college and the NFL. And the first group of penalties that we're going to look at are the 5-yard penalties. These are very common penalties that you'll see in just about every game. The first one is defensive holding, where a defensive player grabs onto an offensive player. It could be a defensive back trying to hold on to a receiver, keep them from getting into their route, or if a defensive back stumbles and the receiver's getting by them, they'll grab onto that receiver to try to prevent them from getting downfield. Sometimes you'll see a defensive lineman hold an offensive lineman to prevent them from moving downfield to block another defensive player. The defensive holding penalty is only a 5-yard penalty, but it carries an automatic first down with it. So if it's a 3rd and long situation and a defense player gets called for it, it can be a big penalty. Even though it's 5 yards, that automatic first down is a significant penalty. Delay a game. This is when the play clock, that we'll talk about a little bit more later, gets down to 0 and the offense hasn't snapped the ball yet. That's typically a delay of game penalty. Now, encroachment and offsides are very similar, but they are different. Encroachment is more of a defensive action, where a defender either lines up in the neutral zone across the ball and doesn't reset themselves before the ball is snapped, or if the quarterback is doing what they call a hard count or a hard cadence, which you can oftentimes hear when you're watching a game, they can get the defender to go across the line of scrimmage, take that first quick initial step. Then the center can snap the ball, catching the defensive player offsides. One thing that a lot of fans do forget about is defensive players can move around. So a defensive player can jump off sides and get back. And if they get back to the defensive side of the line before the center hikes the ball, it's not a penalty. So a lot of times that'll happen in a game, and fans in the stands will be screaming and wondering where the penalty is at. It's not necessarily going to come if the defensive player gets back before the ball is snapped. Another one you have here is false start. This is when an offensive player simulates the start of a play before the ball is actually snapped. It can be on any player on the offensive line. It can be the receivers, the backs. It can even be on the quarterback. This is an offensive penalty. The defensive players, they can move around anytime before the snap of the ball. The 5 offensive linemen and then the 2 players on the line of scrimmage who are going in or who cannot go in motion, they have to be set for 1 second before the ball is snapped. Now, a lot of times you'll see a visiting team, they will have the center turn his head, or one of the guards next to the center will shoot their hand forward and then bring it back. In loud crowd situations, that is allowed as an indicator for the center to snap the ball. However, all players must be set for 1 second before the center snaps it. Illegal contact. This is generally a defensive penalty where a receiver is contacted by a defensive player more than 5 yards downfield. This is also known as the Mel Blount rule. If you look at our episode on Upper Room for the Defensive Hall of Fame, he was a defensive back that would routinely be very physical receivers well down the field, and that is the reason for this rule. Up to 5 yards, a defensive player can make contact with a receiver. Once it goes beyond 5 yards, they're supposed to let go, not have contact with them. Sometimes an offensive player will initiate it, and that will not draw a penalty if the offensive player initiates it. Illegal formation. This is when the offense does not have 7 men on the line of scrimmage. It has to be 7 men. Usually it's the 5 offensive linemen and at least 1 wide receiver. A lot of times the 7th player is the tight end. If one of those players is not far enough forward on the line of scrimmage, they are too far in the backfield, that is a penalty. The standard is that each of those players on the line has to have their head no deeper than the hips of the center. So there's an imaginary line or invisible line from sideline to sideline going through the center's hips. Offensive linemen have to have their heads that far forward. The tight end or the wide receiver on the line of scrimmage have to be at least that far forward. If they're too far off the line, it's a penalty. It's usually called on the offensive linemen, even though they are the ones on the line of scrimmage. If a receiver is too far off, they're not credited with a penalty. But you will see it oftentimes with offensive tackles, especially in passing situations. They try to scoot back a little bit farther, try and give it an advantage to themselves over a defensive end that's rushing. That is what officials look for in later game situations and scenarios, and it's something that they try to keep an eye on. And the last penalty you have in the 5-yard zone that you see commonly is offsides. That can be called for a defensive player. It can be called for an offensive player. Usually it's when a player is lined up in the neutral zone and they don't move before the ball is snapped. Now, with the illegal formation and the offsides and even the encroachment, players, oftentimes you'll see them looking down the sideline toward one of the officials, the line judge or the down judge. Sometimes they'll point to them. If they look at the line judge or the down judge, what they're doing is the players are checking. Defensive players are checking to make sure they're not across the line of scrimmage. Offensive players are making sure that they're either on or off depending on their position. And oftentimes you'll see the officials give a particular hand signal. Usually it's an arm out, signaling a receiver is either on or off the line, but that's something that can be checked by players on both offensive and defensive sides of the ball. You also see it on punt and field goal plays, especially on field goals or extra points. The players on the end of the line who are trying to rush in, they will check with the officials to make sure they're not lined up offsides, and oftentimes they'll do the same with their teammates. The next group of penalties that we have that are common penalties are 10-yard penalties. The first one is fairly common. You see it in almost every college and NFL game. It's a block in the back. Usually happens on a punt return. You don't see it as much on the kick returns anymore at the NFL level because of the new kickoff rules, but it is more common in college now since college football still does the older style of kickoff returns as opposed to what the NFL does now. The dynamic kickoff is what they call it. But it is very common on punts, What it is when a player is running down the field, one of the blockers on the punt return team or the kickoff return team simply gives them a shove in the back or blocks them in the back, or anything where the blocker's head does not get on the front side of the person they're blocking. That is one that sometimes is subjective. Usually the officials are right on it, but it's a fairly common penalty. You'll oftentimes see that a couple of times during the course of a game. Offensive holding, one of the most common penalties, usually on the offensive lineman. One thing to remember though, holding happens on just about every play, if not every play, especially at the professional level. Whether or not it gets flagged is a determination of the official. Is the offensive lineman or the wide receiver, did they interfere enough with the defensive player to prevent them from being involved with the play or making a play? Also, they look at where the hand placement is. Offensive linemen are sometimes forgiven if their hands are on the inside or the chest area of the defensive lineman that they're blocking. If they get outside of what they call the frame of the body, grabbing the edges of the shoulder pads by the shoulders, or turning a defensive player, that will oftentimes draw a flag. Oftentimes you'll see it on offensive tackles on pass protection. If a defensive player is getting around them quickly, the offensive lineman's arm will go up around the neck of the defensive player rushing, and that will draw the flag. Another one that for a time it almost seemed to no longer exist, but it's been an emphasis in the NFL the last few years, is offensive pass interference. This is, again, a 10-yard penalty. This is where the offensive player oftentimes pushes off to get an advantage. If an offensive player just uses an arm bar, so if they're just putting their arm forward and give a little shove towards a defensive player, oftentimes it's not called. But if the offensive player extends their arms, gets them out, involved in the defensive player's body, basically to push them off, that is what can draw the penalty. Next, we have the bigger penalties, 15-yard penalties. Most common ones are unnecessary roughness. Oftentimes this is a hit as a ball carrier or a player is going out of bounds. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes if it's now what's called a blindside block, sometimes they just refer to it as an unnecessary roughness, or any type of a cheap shot or illegal shot on a player, automatically 15 yards and first down. Roughing the passer penalties. Now this is one that I agree that we need to protect the quarterbacks. But at the NFL level, what is getting called for roughing the passer penalties is turning into a bit of a joke. Yes, quarterbacks need to be protected. They are the marquee players. They're the big money players. They're the face of the team. However, it is almost getting to the point where defensive players can't hardly touch a quarterback without getting penalized. And yet you'll see every year, every season, a quarterback get hit on the head or the face and it's not called. And the rules that they have for sacking a quarterback vary. So right now, the best explanation of it, the defensive player basically has to hit a quarterback from the shoulders to above the knees. Anything low, below the knees, will most likely draw a penalty. Anything shoulders and above. So even if a defensive player has their arms up above their head trying to knock down the pass, and they accidentally hit the quarterback in the head, oftentimes that will draw a penalty. I've seen penalties called where a defender is hitting the quarterback right at the belt line, right in the stomach, perfect textbook form tackle, as the quarterback is throwing the football, and they still get called for a penalty. I think that should be a reviewable call now in the NFL world, because I think referees miss more of these than what they actually make correct. Another penalty that they are basically saddling the defensive players with is if you put your body weight down on the quarterback. If as you are hitting the quarterback and he's throwing the ball, does that defensive player drive the quarterback into the ground and land with their body weight on them? It's getting to the point where it is becoming more obvious. Referees are getting better at recognizing it, and whether it's intentional or not. Defensive players are getting better at trying not to land on the quarterback. But when you have a 330-pound man off his feet already driving into another player, the quarterback, it's kind of hard to stop your momentum in midair and not land on another guy. So that's one that players are better at controlling themselves, but it still does happen. Now, one thing that does fall under the roughing the passer category that does give the defenders a little bit of a break is they are supposed to be allowed a step and a half, or at least one step before getting to the quarterback. So if their momentum is carrying them forward and they take a step right as the quarterback is throwing the ball, or they're in the midst of a step as a quarterback is throwing the ball, they're still allowed to hit the quarterback as long as they're not driving him into the ground or throwing him down to the ground. If they just hit him, have their hands up like they're trying not to hurt the quarterback, oftentimes the officials won't call it. If they take 2 or more steps, 3 steps almost always gets called, and they give a big shot to the quarterback, give him a big hit, an elbow up high to the throat area, that will almost always get called. And the last 15-yard penalty is unsportsmanlike conduct. That can be for a number of issues. It can be with taunting, as the NFL has expressed an emphasis on reducing the amount of talking and jawing between players. That is not in a good-natured way. Coaches often can get called with unsportsmanlike penalties. They can be called on anybody on the sidelines. Any assistant coach, any player that's not on the field can be called. But unsportsmanlike conduct, trying to keep the game, in a sense, more civil. There's a couple of penalties that I want to talk about that are not as common or can be kind of confusing. First one is defensive pass interference. This penalty, I think, at the NFL level needs to be changed and needs to be more like the college level. Right now in college, if a defensive player interferes with an offensive receiver, the defensive player is penalized up to 15 yards if the play happens less than 15 yards from the line of scrimmage. So if pass interference happens at 7 yards, it's a 7-yard penalty. If it happens at 12 yards, it's a 12-yard penalty. Anything more than 15 yards downfield, so on a long pass, 30, 40 yards downfield, it's 15 yards and an automatic first down. I like the college penalty more than the NFL. The NFL, a long time ago, adopted the defensive pass interference as a spot foul. Because long passes were considered a big play, and defenders oftentimes would tackle a receiver to prevent the touchdown. In order to minimize that, the NFL allowed it to be a spot foul, so it could be 30, 35, 40, 50 yards downfield. However, over time, offenses have gotten better at taking advantage of defensive players and taking advantage of the officials. Oftentimes, quarterbacks will now intentionally underthrow a pass, and receivers are taught to try to jump back into the ball, back into the defender to draw that penalty for defensive pass interference. That gets the offense a free 30 yards and, in a sense, a get-out-of-jail-free card where they get a big play without getting a big play. I would like to see the NFL adopt the defensive level of pass interference where it's up to 15 yards, it's a spot foul. Anything beyond that is automatically 15 yards. Defenses are better at covering, defensive backs are getting better, and it's getting to the point where it's hard for defensive backs to really do their job the way they're supposed to be able to. And if the NFL isn't going to change yardage, then make it reviewable. Make it go up to the booth and determine if the defensive player really did interfere with the offensive player. Because more often than not, incidental contact or the defensive player is just trying not to get burned and lose their job. So I would like to see that change. The other 2 penalties we're going to talk about here are running into the kicker and roughing the kicker. Now these are similar. You'll see them on punts or on field goal plays, but there is a difference to them. Running into the kicker is just a minor hit, maybe brushing the shoulder of the punter as they're punting the ball, where they might knock him down, but it's not necessarily a violent hit. You can do that to a kicker on a field goal, a punter on a punt, and the holder on a field goal is awarded the same protection as the kicker. Roughing is a 15-yard penalty, where the running into is just 5 yards. Roughing the kicker is a 15-yard penalty. And that often is called, you see it most often on a punt play, where a member of the punt return unit is rushing, they're trying to block the punt, and they hit the plant leg of the punter. Or if it's on a field goal, the plant leg of the kicker. But the most common is hitting that plant leg of the punter. As the punter is coming down after the kick, all of their weight is on that plant leg. A lot of that weight is on that knee, and it doesn't take a lot of force to cause a knee injury. Now, if the ball is touched on a punt, if someone is trying to block the punt and they even get a finger on it, that negates the penalty. Same way on a field goal kick. If someone tips the ball, then there is no penalty. On a punt play, if one of the blockers throws or pushes or in the act of blocking a defensive player, shoves them into the punter or into the kicker, but most commonly into the punter, that is not considered a penalty because the defensive player's momentum is changed and he is pushed into the punter by an offensive player. So those are the most common penalties that we see in the NFL right now and in college football. We'll have to look for them on Saturdays and Sundays. but this will hopefully allow you to recognize what penalties they are. The next thing we're going to talk about are common terms. Now, these are terms that you're going to hear nearly every week in a college football game or NFL game that if you're not familiar with them, these will help clear up some areas and will help you better understand the game. For you longtime football fans, maybe it's just a good review. Let's take a look at these. The first one is the A gap. This is a space between the center and the guard. On the offense, usually offensive teams number the gaps. Odds are to one side, evens are to the other. Defense, they just call out the gaps by letters. The spaces between the center and the guards are the A gaps. Between the guards and the tackles are B gaps. But usually it's the A and the B that are most common. One popular defensive strategy now is having two defensive players on either side of the center, either showing that they're going to blitz or faking blitz, dropping back, or one will blitz and the other one will drop back. Just a way to attack the offense. By having two players in that A gap, in each A gap right in front of the center, it forces the offense to have to respond to that threat, work inside out to protect the quarterback. Next one is the line of scrimmage, or LOS. Line of scrimmage is that imaginary line, the length of the football that stretches from sideline to sideline. Technically, only the hand of the center is supposed to be across the line of scrimmage. With the size of players today, the head of the center can be there, but all other players need to be behind the back edge of the football on the offensive side, and all the defensive players need to be away from the football on the defensive side. Next one is run pass option, or RPO. This is the type of play where a quarterback will get the snap, usually in a shotgun or what they call pistol formation. The quarterback will fake a handoff. It's the running back's job to get close to the quarterback. And what the quarterback is looking for, they don't look at the running back. They'll look at a defensive end or a linebacker or a safety to determine if they're going to give the ball to the running back and do it on a run play, or if they're going to take the ball from the running back and then throw it on a pass behind the linebacker or the safety. To kind of go along with the run pass option is the play action. Now, this is where a quarterback is lined up under center, the ball is snapped, quarterback fakes a handoff to running back to try and bring the defense up, and then they try to pass the ball behind the defense, behind the linebackers, in front of the safeties. Next, you have the football IQ, which is the intelligence of a quarterback or a football player based on what they understand about football as opposed to basically common life. Next, you have Tampa 2. This is a common type of zone defense where you have two deep safeties that are on the wider edges of the field near the numbers, trying to prevent anything deep down the sidelines, and oftentimes is characterized by a middle linebacker running down the middle of the field to fill up that middle zone. The rest of the defensive players are in a zone coverage in particular areas, with the cornerbacks on the outside usually looking more for short zones or shorter areas of the field as opposed to going deep. Next, you have arm talent of the quarterback. This is basically how strong or how accurate the quarterback's arm is. But basically, it's the strength of the quarterback's arm and how hard, in a sense, they can throw the ball. Next one is YAC, the YAC, yards after catch. Some people are starting to refer to it as yards after carry for running games. But this is simply the number of yards a receiver can get after catching the football. The red zone is simply the area from the 20-yard line and in, the team's defensive end of the field, where the offense is trying to score. It's made more difficult by the fact that field is compressed, so the defenders have less area to cover, and it makes it more important for teams to try to score. Next, you have the pick six, which is simply an interception return for a touchdown. It's a lot easier to say pick six than interception return for a touchdown. Scoop and score, that's a fumble that's picked up and returned for a touchdown by the defense also. Screen pass, this is where an offensive team throws a pass that must be caught behind the line of scrimmage, but it does allow for the offensive lineman to get down the field, to try to get blocks down the field. They'll let the defensive lineman through after briefly blocking them. And then the receiver can be a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end. They just have to catch it behind the line of scrimmage. High motor, this is a player with a lot of energy or puts forth a lot of effort. West Coast offense, this is a type of offense most prevalent in the NFL level that uses a short passing game as an extension of the running game. It stretches a defense horizontally instead of vertically. We mentioned this in a few of our other videos, but one key component of this is timing for the quarterback. Game manager, this is sometimes referred to as a derogatory term for a quarterback, as a quarterback who isn't the greatest athlete or has limited arm talent. Quarterbacks that aren't top tier are oftentimes referred to as game managers. Field position, this is simply where the ball is at on the field. Simulated pressure and green dog. These two terms we're going to look at here. Simulated pressure, this is when you have multiple defenders up at the line of scrimmage. This is a play that I talked about in an earlier episode with Alabama, Oklahoma college football playoff game. Here, Alabama had 8 defensive players up on the line of scrimmage. Oklahoma's quarterback was trying to see, who was blitzing, who was not, who was rushing, who was not. Having 8 players up near the line of scrimmage, the defense was trying to show that they maybe were rushing the passer, but in reality, they had multiple players drop back into coverage. They ended up only rushing 3 players, confused the quarterback. He ended up throwing an interception for a pick 6. The next term that we have is green dog. This is where a linebacker, so one of these B players on this diagram, instead of being in a zone, they're covering a running back, for example, the red player with the R in this diagram, man-to-man. If that running back goes out on a pass route like they do on this play, the linebacker has that running back man-to-man. If they stay in to block to help protect the quarterback, the linebacker blitzes and goes after the quarterback. More common terms, we have banjo, rub, pick routes. This is a combination of offensive and defensive terms. A rub route or a pick route is where you have 2 receivers. One is outside, one is inside. They will cross, where the outside receiver tries to rub or pick or basically get in the way of the defensive player guarding the inside receiver in order to get them open. This can be offensive pass interference. As long as the receiver looks like he's actually running a route, it generally doesn't get flagged. But a banjo is a term that defenders use to switch coverage. So the inside defensive player will switch and cover the receiver from the outside coming in. The outside defensive back will cover the receiver going out. Ball hawk is a defensive back, usually a deep safety or a free safety, who is simply at the back end of the defense and is looking to get interceptions. Oftentimes these players are very good at intercepting deep passes. The 3 technique, this is a defensive player on the line of scrimmage. It's a defensive tackle in this diagram. Defensive tackle is the T on the defensive line, right next to the G for the right guard. The right side of that G is shaded. That's the side of his body that defensive tackle is on. That player is the 3 technique. All of the offensive and defensive linemen are in an area that are called the trenches, which is simply the offensive and defensive parts of the line of scrimmage. Next, you have the flat. In the previous diagram where we had the running back going out to the sidelines, it's part of the field just past the line of scrimmage towards the sidelines where receivers often go for a safety valve route or a shallow route to either give the quarterback someplace to throw the ball if they're under pressure or to try to pull defenders up to get another receiver open behind them. Down the seam, this is where a receiver goes running between defensive players in zones. Usually in the interior part of the field, between a linebacker and a safety, there's an opening or a seam there. The receiver is running down the seam, down that opening, and a good quarterback can oftentimes throw the pass there. Climbing the pocket, this is often referred to as quarterbacks moving up in the pocket. Just the quarterback being aware where the defensive players are, whether or not they're under pressure. Good quarterbacks, like Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, have very good pocket awareness, moving up, moving around the quarterback. Right now, Patrick Mahomes is absolutely amazing at it, at moving around in the pocket. Younger quarterbacks, college-level quarterbacks, young NFL quarterbacks, and experienced players, they don't have that good of pocket awareness. Oftentimes, they will simply sprint out of the pocket area behind their offensive line at the first hint of trouble. Next is a pancake. That's simply a block by an offensive lineman, flattening a defensive player on their back. Could be a defensive back if the offensive lineman is out in front of a play blocking. Tight window, that is an area like a seam area between a couple of defensive backs or a linebacker and a safety. It's an area where a quarterback throws the ball into where his receiver has a chance of catching it, but the defenders hopefully don't have a chance to deflect the ball or intercept it. It's a small area. Tight window throws are what the elite quarterbacks can do better than anyone else, like an Aaron Rodgers, like a Patrick Mahomes. Bull rush, this is simply a defensive player, usually a defensive tackle or a nose tackle, but can be a defensive end, where they simply push the offensive lineman back into the quarterback's lap in the middle of the pocket. A light or a loaded box, this is the area between the offensive tackles and about 5 yards from the line of scrimmage. A light box is where you have more offensive blockers than defensive players. So if you have your 5 linemen and your tight end, 4 defensive linemen and 1 linebacker, that's a light box where the offense has an advantage, or 4 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers. It's a light box because the offense has 6 blockers for 6 defenders. A loaded box is where you might have 7 or 8 defenders up in that area of the line of scrimmage in a known run situation. That's where a defense is trying to stop the run. If you have a good running back and a not very good quarterback, defenses will load the box, put more people around the line of scrimmage to try to make the quarterback throw the ball down the field. And the last term is the play clock. That's simply the time in between the end of one play and the start of another. Now, there's different rules for the play clock. At the 15-second mark, all communication from the sideline is cut off. The coordinators cannot talk to the quarterbacks or the defensive player that's taking the signals. That's the 15-second mark. The 25-second mark is when there's a stoppage of play. If there's a change of possession after a punt and their TV goes to a commercial break, when they come back from that commercial break, the play clock is set at 25 seconds. When the TV is ready to go, the official will signal the ready for play. The play clock will start, not the game clock. And then the quarterback has to get up the line of scrimmage and run the play before that 25 seconds runs out. And lastly, the 40-second play clock. This is a typical play clock. Once the previous play ends and the referees rule that the ball is dead, the play clock is reset and starts. And the last group of terms that we're going to talk about are the cliches. You'll hear announcers talk about these all the time. These are kind of simple, but we do need to discuss them because you hear them virtually every week. Taking it one game at a time. This is said by teams if they're on a winning streak or a losing streak to just try to focus on the next game and to try to avoid a quote for the reporters. We just didn't execute. This is what players or coaches often say if they lose a game. It's that simple. It's another way of saying we didn't play well. Next man up. Not crazy about this term myself. At the NFL and college levels, football's a violent game. You're going to have players get injured. And the next man up, the next man to step forward and play. Well, if that next man up is as good as a starter, well, then they might be starting somewhere else. So you're replacing a starter or a top player, oftentimes with a player who's not of the same caliber, but they're expected to do the same things. We've got to play 4 quarters. This is often said by players and coaches. There is kind of a hidden meaning to this. Oftentimes you'll see games where one team gets way ahead at the early part of the game. Can be a hockey game, can be a baseball game. Saw it at times during the World Cup. If a team gets ahead early, they lose that intensity, they lose their edge. And sometimes teams don't get it back. The team that was behind can come back and either make it an exciting game at the end or even win the game. There is some importance to it because you do need to play the entire game. And if teams get ahead early, sometimes they don't leave it all on the field. They don't play the full 4 quarters and win the game. Leaving it all on the field just means you gave your all, gave your effort. The best players should be tired at the end of a game. Coach is saying you have to establish a run. Well, it's a way to be more physical than the other team and a way to eat the clock, especially if you're ahead. You can burn more time. The refs cost us the game. I really don't like this one. You'll hear players say it a lot. You'll hear coaches say it a lot. If you don't want the refs to cost you the game, what you need to do is not be in position for the refs to cost you the game. Get a big lead. Dominate your opponent. Don't let the officials determine the outcome. At the top levels, the margins for victory and defeat are razor thin. So the best way to avoid that possibility is getting a big lead and don't let the refs decide the game for you. Next, you have special teams that matter. Special teams do matter, especially on punts. That's a 40-yard field position change on every play. Potential of a turnover or a touchdown. Field goals can win or lose games. Special teams do matter. Players and coaches say it. Oftentimes they give it lip service, but special teams really do matter. It is the hidden 1/3 of the game that the best teams take seriously. Third down is the money down. This is where quarterbacks make their money converting third downs. It's oftentimes where there are big plays, whether offensive side or defensive side. That is where the best players make their money, which is the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the defensive ends, and the offensive tackles, and the cornerbacks. Those are the 5 highest paid positions in the NFL right now. Those are the positions that are most known on third downs and are most influential of a game on third downs. Quarterback is an extension of the coach or a coach on the field. This is more for great quarterbacks than younger quarterbacks. A Patrick Mahomes, an Aaron Rodgers, a Brady, a Manning, a Joe Montana. Quarterbacks that understand what the coaches want are trying to execute that coach's plan. Quarterbacks that are very smart. They may not have the arm talent, but from the neck up, they are very smart players. Last cliches are pound the rock. This just simply means running the football. Pinning their ears back. This is mostly for defensive players in passing situations, oftentimes at the end of the game. They don't have to worry about the run. They can just focus on getting upfield and going after the quarterback. Playing complementary football. This is mostly offense and defense. If you have an offensive team that can score a lot, you want to have a defense that can at least hold the opponents down and not score as much. If you have a great defensive team, you want an offense that can control the ball and score enough points for you to win. But having both your offense and defense complement each other, help each other out, defense getting turnovers give the offense a short field and better chance of scoring. offense taking care of the football, not turning it over themselves, using a lot of clock to give their defense time to rest and give the opponents fewer options to score. That's good complementary football. And the last two kind of go together. Offense sells tickets, or offense wins games, and defense wins championships. Offense is exciting. That's why the NFL has so many rules that benefit the offense over the defense. In the airline industry, they call putting cheeks in seats, getting fans to come to the game, paying for the streaming services. But defense wins championships. In the 7 Super Bowls where you've had the number one offense play the number one defense, only twice has the number one offense won. The first time was the Raiders and the Vikings in the 70s. In that Super Bowl, the Vikings had the number one defense. Raiders had the number one offense and won. In the late 80s, San Francisco 49ers beat the Denver Broncos, crushed them in the Super Bowl. It's really the biggest real blowout in Super Bowl history, 55-10. But defense generally does win championships. The best defensive teams travel well. If you have a passing offense, throwing offense, high winds, bad weather can affect your offense. Bad weather usually doesn't affect a defensive team. That's what helps win championships. Good, solid defense. You had a stretch in the early 2000s across all major sports. Teams that played the best defense were winning championships. The New Jersey Devils in hockey, the Baltimore Ravens in football, the San Antonio Spurs in basketball. They were all great defensive teams that limited the other team's offensive opportunities, and they were winning championships. So that's a list of penalties, common terms, and cliches that you're going to see in the upcoming season. Time to start watching them, getting used to them, getting ready for the upcoming football season. And hopefully for you new fans, it'll help you make you look a little bit smarter, a little bit more knowledgeable among your family and friends. For your experienced fans, just a refresher course on what to look for during the course of games. This has been the Teaching Football Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bates. Thank you for watching and sharing with your family and friends. Remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you on our next episode.